great Redeemer, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty, hold me with thine powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me till my want is all. Feed me till my want is all.
Please all be seated. Welcome to the chapel of This Nintendo Life. I am your priest for today,
Lord MBZ himself.
Lord, literally Lord MBZ. And what you just heard, of course, is everyone's favourite hymn number 247. You all join us today for a very special episode, a very special moment for this podcast that has been building to for almost 10 years. Episode 247. Now, you might be confused. Why the hell did you open this episode singing a hymn? What's going on there? Doesn't make any sense. Well, it will all make sense, and I will hand you over to our chaplain of this particular chapel, Bali, who has many things to say about this particular thing.
Yeah, where to start? Well, for those who don't know, me and MBZ have known each other a very long time, and we went to school together since the age of 5. And when we were little lads around, so we joined the choir basically. And
yes.
I think we joined the choir at the age of about 9, 10?
Probably a little younger, maybe.
8? Yeah. Right.
Yeah, maybe around that age. So here's the thing, right? Like, to join the choir, we had music class, okay? And we had a music teacher. And our music teacher, basically, the entire audition for the choir was basically like sing one line or something like that. And just during one of our music classes one time, he just went around the room and was like, okay, everyone individually has to sing a thing. And then literally based on that, he was like, all right, you guys are in the choir, you guys are not in the choir. It was a very, I remember it quite clearly, but it was a very quick snap decision that happened, basically, of whether we could be in the choir or not. And so we were chosen for the choir, Bali. And obviously the choir was in a special place in the chapel. And so we were up at the front, very cool people doing cool stuff. But the thing about being in choir was that you had to go and do choir practice on lunches. And we're like 9-year-olds, we're idiots. Like, we're pissing about constantly.
We're ready for a free burger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and what I did as well, which is to make the weirdest concoctions possible, which is to take a combination of Coke and Iron Brew and mix it together, and then take a packet of crisps and a biscuit, and then dip them in the concoction of Coke and Iron Brew, and be like, "Look at me, guys! I'm cool. I eat weird food." So that was a.
But our school definitely lured people to join the choir with the promise of junk food. So this was Iron Brew, Coke, burgers, chips. Every Thursday? I want to say it was
I think it was, yeah.
Every Thursday lunchtime. And you got to eat outside. It got taken outside, and you just had it was great. You had lunch outside, and then the downside was you then went inside, back into the chapel, and you had to practice choir during your lunch break, because that was choir lunch. You get the junk food in return for the singing. And then,
yeah, exactly.
As you said, MZ, guide me, O thou great Jehovah, or Redeemer, depending on the version. We did Redeemer. Redeemer was at our first school.
Yeah.
And Jehovah was at our second school. Not going to name drop the schools, but from what we've described, you can probably guess the type of schools we were at.
Yeah,
very posh boy little schools with chapels and hymns and organs and very classical, this kind of thing.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, and hymn number 247, we would sing this hymn, and we'd have these hymn books, and miraculously, on occasion, because we'd sing every morning in chapel. This wasn't just at choir practice, choir lunch. This was every single morning,
and it would be a different hymn every morning. And so, it would go up on the board, and it would be today's hymn is this number. And basically, one day, what happened was we were, at the start of the day, is the hymn, and we're looking at it, and I can't remember who it was, but someone with their hymn book like has it, and the hymn book just opens as if an act of God. The hymn book just magically opens to hymn 247, and we're like, holy shit, what just happened? God truly is real, and now we must praise him in this very weird way. So what we decided was we were going to fuck with it, right? And we were going to make sure that the next time 247 happened, all of us would be able to do the same thing. So here's what we did, everybody. We took those hymn books across our line and we bent them. We bent the fuck out of them. We bent them onto page 247 where the hymn was, and we made sure that the next time the 247 popped up, all of us in a row could put our hands out with those books and it would automatically just go to hymn 247.
Exactly.
And I think it took 6 months or so. It took a while to rotate through.
Hymn number 247, hymns. It comes round a fair frequent pace. We're talking every few weeks. It came back. Right. Here we go. Hymn number 247. Do I have a book that does it? And then we'd open the book, and occasionally, would you believe it, hymn number 247 would just appear. And it was just like this magical thing. But here's the weird thing, is that later in life, and as the years went by, this number, 247, you find it appears everywhere. Now, there's a number of reasons why it appears everywhere, because it's also 24/7, and everywhere is open 24/7. We'll always have a 24/7. So you find yourself seeing this number. So this number that was associated with our childhood and our friendship in the choir, we would just see it everywhere, to the point where 247, I mean, you played JRPGs and games with numbers in them, and the number just appears everywhere. It's always 247. I keep seeing it to this day. So
we message each other all the time when we see 247 stuff. We're just like, oh, by the way, I saw this thing 247. It's one of those things that just carried on through. Beep beep beep. Hey, editing NBZ here, and just to jump off that point, I just got a new debit card in, and not to dox myself, but the numbers of that credit card include 247. So it really is everywhere, and it always follows us around and never leaves us. It will be here forever. Back to the show. Beep beep beep. For a long period of time. So yeah, it's a myth, a legend, and very much tied up in how long we've known each other for, and the weird stuff that we've done.
And I remember when we started this podcast, we thought it's going to be a damn long time before we reach episode number 247. And
right, because for regular shows, that's about 500 episodes to get to that point. Yeah.
So yeah, we're pretty shocked we've made it this far, and we're also very proud that we can celebrate this number. There's a big part of our friendship here on this podcast that we put together.
Absolutely.
It's what a celebration indeed.
So there you go, the first 10 minutes of the show dedicated to explaining the lore of 247 on this 247th episode.
Now, people probably have a number of follow-up questions, so if you have follow-up questions to anything we've explained,
hit us up in the Discord. The link to the Discord is in the show notes. But yeah, if you want to discuss hymns and choirs and prep school and all that sort of stuff, then let us know. And if you want me to, if you can book me for your wedding, if you want me to do some more singing for you, all that good stuff, it's good fun. So I definitely, I feel like my singing voice is different when I do hymns versus any other kind of sing. I lean into the kind of I don't know,
the tenor,
the kind of highfalutin kind of vocal of singing a hymn, right? There's a presence, there's I don't know, there's a difference to it as opposed to singing anything else. So there you go. I don't know.
Did you sing tenor until the end of your singing career?
I
mean, obviously at the time we were soprano because we were pre-voices.
I don't think I can do a proper tenor, if I'm honest. I did do bass when we were at our next school. When I did a bit more quiet. Yeah, I did. I did do
tenor
bass.
till the end. I can swap between tenor and bass.
Yeah, I think tenor can get really fucking difficult because it can go very high. But
then you can just drop it down low. You just go
exactly.
High,
yeah. It's tough, but
we should join a choir again one day.
Oh man, I love it. Honestly, it's I did. As much as I'm very, I would say, anti-church as an establishment.
Right.
I think the idea
very
of
choir, anti-church.
Yeah, exactly. It's a weird place to be in.
I've got a real love for when Christmas rolls around. We'll always put on the Cambridge. What they call King's College Cambridge choir.
Yeah.
I appreciate that far more than your standard Christmas bollocks music, which is just awful. So I will that's the one time a year that a choir is always on in our flat.
Yeah, God bless you, merry gentlemen. Shout out. What a fucking banger of a song. So, yeah, I have a lot of fondness for all of that. And also, I have a lot of fondness for the descant, which is, I think, one of the best parts of being in choir was getting to sing the descant.
Oh, you get to do the little special bit. Yeah.
Exactly. So, if you don't know what a descant is, it's basically like in the final verse of a lot of hymns, and mainly this is around Christmas, I would say.
Yeah.
The final verse of a lot of hymns, the choir would sing like a special version of it that was like
it's a tune on top of the existing tune.
It's a harmony essentially.
It's more than at points it does harmonize, but it's more than a harmony because it's like an entire separate thing that complements the existing tune that the rest of the congregation is singing. So that if you're part of the congregation, and I found this a lot at our second school where I wasn't in the choir at an older age, where you could hear the choir singing the descant, and then because my brain went back into first school mode where I know this descant, and then I'd start singing the descant, but I can't sing the descant. I'm in the congregation. I'm not meant to sing and my brain would get like stuck between the two, and it was
God. I got so fucked up by that shit because I would want to sing it so bad, and then I'd realize that my voice wasn't high enough anymore because I wasn't a child, so I couldn't do like the high because it tended to be quite high, a lot of those ones, and that was tricky, but shout out to descants. Very, very cool.
There we go.
So there you go. Hello, welcome to this video game podcast. By the way, where we talk about Nintendo, and we're going to talk about Nintendo today. Bally, do you want to let the fine folks at home know what today's show is going to entail?
Well, for the remaining part of the first segment, we're going to talk about the games that we have been playing, and for our second segment, we have some emails that you kind listeners have sent in. So we're going to cover
absolutely. Yeah, feel free to send in emails, asking about hymns and stuff. That'll be good for the future because we have so much knowledge on it. So let's get into the video games that we have been playing. And Bally, brand new release came out. Nintendo, in their infinite wisdom, decided, Zelda's coming out in a few weeks. Lol, how about we drop like a 30-hour expansion to Xenoblade 3?
Well, fear not, because MBZ loves to inhale Xenoblades.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exactly what I did. I finished this thing, 25 hours. I did it in the space of... it hasn't been a week yet since the game came out. And I was done with it. And also, I was pretty busy because I was like at home. I saw you one night, so that was like a whole night of not playing Xenoblade. Yeah.
We've had like Korean barbecue since we last recorded. Like,
exactly. Big event. Yeah. So and also I was away. Like the day it came out, I was doing some talks. I was giving some talks in the games industry, and then I came back and I was like, well, all I'm gonna do now is play Xenoblade. And the first night when I got back only like I don't know 7 o'clock ish, and I somehow played 5 hours that night. I don't know how, but I'd already put 5 hours into the thing, and obviously if you listen to the show for a long time, you'll know that this is like pretty much my favorite RPG series at this point in time. I think it's my number one, and it's very special to me. I was very enamored with the first game and really bowled over by it. And it is one of the first games that I really talked about in depth on this show back at the very beginning, because I did get it in 2011. So it's been about 12 years now since that first game for me, because it came out in the UK in 2011, right after Skyward Sword, or around the time, actually. It was before Skyward Sword, but I played it after Skyward Sword. But it was the end of 2011, and then obviously it took a while to come out in North America. So it's been like over a decade of this series, and it's really risen to prominence, right? Like it's one of those series that Nintendo initially weren't even going to localize for North America, and now it's ending Nintendo Directs and stuff like that with a third entry. So it's definitely risen its significance a significant amount, and I think there's a lot of amazing things about the series, and I think that like it feels like a journey that is kind of coming to an end here, because really this final piece, this last kind of DLC for Xenoblade 3, feels like it is putting the bow on this saga that has been told, and the callbacks and the references and so much of it is just so rich and fulfilling for people who have followed the series for a long time. What I will say is you can't really talk about this game without spoiling a lot of elements of not only Xenoblade 3, but the entire series itself. So if you're wary about that stuff and you plan to play these games in the future, or if you think, for example, I want to stay completely fresh on every single aspect. I would maybe stay clear of this a little bit, of what I'm about to talk about, because there's some stuff, and obviously it was part of the trailers as well, right? It's very clear that, hey, his characters from the first and second game, and there's other stuff going on here, so it's very clear that, if you haven't followed the series up to this point, you might want to just jump out, because, yeah, it's pretty much impossible to talk about this DLC without discussing those elements. So we'll put a timestamp here or whatever, and people can jump out. But this basically ties up a lot of kind of meta elements of the narrative, right? There are things from the first game, the second game, like the end of both those games, and the way they tie together, and the way that it links into the third game. There's a conversation in this game where they're just like, we're just going to talk about the Trinity processor, and we're just going to say Ontos and Logos and Numa, and people are, if you haven't played the games, you're going to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, there's real lore deep dives in the middle of this thing, where I was pretty, like, surprised that they did it, and, like, I'm pretty...
Is it like fake Latin?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, all those things are words that refer to things in the kind of, not meta-narrative, but, like, the wider what is going on with all these games, right? And so, like, if you haven't played the whole series up to this point, all 3 games, you're going to be a bit lost when that stuff pops up. And I think the nice thing about Xenoblade 3 and all the games is that they are standalone stories, right? Like the story of Noah and Mio and their entire crew has like a huge emotional heart to it and center, and hits incredibly hard just knowing those characters and what's going on. And then there's a little extra sprinkled on top, right? This DLC, Future Redeemed, feels like... it's more than sprinkled on top. Like, it is the kind of core of the experience, because you have an older Rex, you have an older Shulk, you have these characters who are clearly their children, but they don't know they're their children because of the setup of this world and what's happened in that, the entire idea of this. It was basically fused together the worlds, and the entire data for both worlds were stored in Origin, this giant supercomputer. And what happened is that people get spat back out into the system into an endless cycle of death and rebirth, where they live for 10 years and then they die and they go back again. And so, these characters who are clearly the kids of Rex and Shulk, and they never actually outright say it, but it's like very obvious and talked about. And, even before this DLC came out, everyone was like, well, that's clearly Shulk's son, and that's like a little Pyra, so that's clearly Rex's daughter, right? And it's really interesting having that tension between those characters, where you now have these kind of main characters from the previous series who are now the Dunban kind of like equivalent, where they are the older statesmen, they are the kind of mentors, the master figures, and how they interact with those younger characters, I think is super interesting. And like, this game is just riddled with references, mainly for the first game. And I say that's why this feels like such a full circle moment, because you go to Colony 9, the original Colony 9, and holy shit, the moment that I heard the music kick in for Colony 9, I just felt like flooded with nostalgia. Even though I played as Definitive Edition only a couple of years ago, like, I have such a strong personal connection and emotional connection to that music and that time.
It's a good tune. It's a banger.
It's amazing, yeah. And like, just the music of the surrounding area, and then going into Colony 9, and like, there are moments of like, oh shit, that's Outlook Park. That's like where Fiora and Shulk had that sandwich at the beginning of the game. And like, the really nice thing is that there are these moments, these affinity scenes, where they'll basically just be like circles on the ground that are glowing, and you walk up to them and it will play out. It will basically do a kind of a scenic view, and characters will have conversation in the background. And so like, Shulk is describing like, I used to come here, and all that sort of stuff, and basically nostalgically reflecting on the past. Same with Rex, with certain places that you go to, because the world is a merge of 1 and 2. Like, there's some really funny moments as well, where like, in the original Xenoblade, there's a part of the game where you come up to this this kind of like broken off edge, and you're going up these stairs, and you're coming to the edge of this place, and there's like a special item there, so you're just going to go and collect it. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, and I can't remember if this ever happened to you, Bally, but like, a giant spider will just kind of crawl out in front of you, and it's one of those iconic moments from Xenoblade where you're like, oh shit, like, as a player, you're like, oh fuck, that fucking giant spider came and attacked me, and the characters don't comment on it in the game at all. It's just like, it's an in-world moment.
This is normal.
This is normal, yeah. But then there's a scene in this game where Shulk is like, Yeah, I remember that place. There was a big surprise at the
that's
end of that
funny.
for us, and I was like, "That's so cool!" Like, I love that they are. This was clearly made by people with reverence and love for that original game and the source material in every way. And there are so many little nods here and there, like the original gem crafting machine. You can fix it as part of a side quest in this game, and like there's callbacks to like, oh, that old gem man, he didn't think this would still be working, in this weird space-time continuum thing where we're in a different world but with the same stuff going on. It just has such a love for it, and I think that comes through really strongly. But also, like, obviously is telling a new story. The main character of this game is very different from main characters in previous Xenoblade games. He feels more like a Rhine or like a more kind of brutish character. He's called Matthew, and his accent is like, it's like, oh, it's me, Matthew, mate. I'm like, you're
London.
what are you doing? He's like, it's London, mate. Like this, I'm Matthew. You're a div. He says you're a div in this game at one point. I'm like, what is going on here? Like, he's using slang, and he's like, bruv, what's going on? It's me, Matthew, I'll fix it. Like he's very much that, very straightforward, kind of a himbo in a lot of ways, like has that energy to him and feels different as a protagonist. And I think part of the reason for that is because you have Shulk and Rex here already, and they already fulfill like that protagonist archetype that you usually expect. So I think it's interesting that they went in a different direction with him, and I think it works. Initially, I didn't like his accent or the voice actor to begin with. I was like, oh, this feels weird. This is not what I'm here for. But I think it really works in the end, and I don't know, it gets across a different flavor, different sense, and I think the focus here is still on his story and what's going on with him and his link to Xenoblade 3, because basically this is a prequel story, right? This is there's a place called the City in Xenoblade 3, and there are founders of the city, and when you go into the city in Xenoblade 3, you see the statues of the founders, and so there are, people knew this was coming because there's a statue of Rex, there's a statue of Shulk, there's a statue of these other people as well, and there was a lot of like speculation of like, who are these people, what are they doing, all that sort of stuff. And this game ties up all those loose threads. It basically says, okay, this is what happened. This was the story of what happened and how it all got tied up together, as well as the way in which it kind of interlinks with the wider lore and narrative. And there's a moment at the end of this game where you go somewhere, and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Are we really doing this? Like we're seeing the origin of this entire thing. Like it was so cool and just a full circle moment. And I think like narratively, this is definitely you can't miss it if you're a Xenoblade fan. Basically, it's like it feels like it should be just like mandatory for everybody who's played the rest of the games to play this. It like Torna's great and Future Connected are great, and I really like those as like extra pieces of stuff that you can go and do more exploration and all that sort of amazing Xenoblade stuff. But this feels core to the experience, and really, as I said, it feels like it's looping back around to the first game in so many ways. It feels like that final kind of cherry on top of the series of Tetsuya Takahashi's journey to create his quote-unquote perfect works through the Xeno series, and it's taken this one series, Xenoblade in particular, for him to do it, which is amazing. There's a lot of interesting quirk to the differences in gameplay stuff as well. So you have 6 set characters this time, so there's less management when it comes to like classes, and I guess the original game did have 6 set characters, but you also had the hero characters who came in, so you had like 7 people usually. But here, because it's just you're kind of locked into your archetypes, you are able to kind of do a bit less micromanaging, because there was a lot of micromanaging. There's still a lot of menu stuff in this game, kind of digging into menus and stuff like that. But the thing that they've changed that I really like is there's much more of an incentive for exploration, where, previously you would unlock new gem slots or new arts or new skill slots, that sort of stuff, by leveling up or by just progressing through the game, through the narrative. Whereas here, they basically treat all of those as unlockables that you can find out in the wild. So you can come across a chest, and inside the chest, you'll be like, oh, I now have a gem unlock kit, which allows me to add an extra gem slot to one of my characters. And so it gives you an incentive to explore a lot, which the game has always been great about. The series has all been fantastic about it, giving you like reasons to, and giving you experience points for finding secret views and all that sort of stuff, which I still love. But they're adding an extra layer onto that by making this exploration focus tie into the progression, where you might want to lean into making Rex the most powerful guy in your team, and you can do that. You can unlock all of his gem slots early, give him more skills than anyone else, all the arts, that sort of stuff, or you can kind of be a bit more even-handed, spread it around to people. But you can pick your favorites, and Glimmer, for example, who's one of the characters characters that I liked playing as a lot, she kind of has a kind of more healer play style, but she also puts down like a field on the ground that does kind of boost attack damage and all that sort of stuff. And I had her set up in a way that I was leaning on her a lot for a lot of the fights, and so I was investing more into her skills and her arts and all that sort of stuff. And it's a little bit more restricted in the sense that you only have 3 main arts and 3 kind of additional ones, so there's less experimentation there. But I think the game kind of leans on this exploration stuff and the kind of the choice between which characters do you want to max out versus other ones to kind of make that decision instead, which I think is a cool way of handling it, and I think it works really well. And the other thing that they've done is that they've added, like in these games, I tend to feel like I'm never going to 100% these because there's way too much stuff to do, and like the tracking is difficult.
You got to fill out that map.
And yeah, I do love filling out the map, and that's always what I do, right? I will just walk around the place to fill out the map, which is, inevitable. It's going to happen. But in terms of 100%ing, I've never been the sort of person to be like, oh, I'm going to do all the community and all that sort of stuff. And they do a subtle thing in this game that is so minor, but completely just broke my brain and changed the way I think about it, in the sense that like they itemize all these things in such a satisfying kind of manner where the community tab that shows all the different NPCs that you meet within the colony and other places, you have like a little checklist next to every single person. And also the nice thing here, you can now highlight a person and they will show up on the map, because that was also another frustration with the previous games of like, well, this person, who are they? Where the hell are they right now? They should be at this place at this time. But now you can just pop an icon on a map and it'll show you where they are. And it will, once you have kind of, filled out their community thing and like increased your relationship with them, it will now just do a little tick over their name, and it is the dumbest thing in the world, but they just put a little tick, and I'm like, well, I'm getting a fucking tick on everybody now. Like, it's so stupid, but it's such a minor little thing where it incentivizes me to do that stuff. And it's the exact same with enemies. So they've added an incentive to kind of it's not grinding at all and doesn't feel like that, but they're like, okay, you have to kill 3 of these enemy types. And I'm like, well, that's just like a boring side quest. But the entire game, every enemy is catalogued. So you have the enemypedia, which is like, okay, it tracks how many enemies you fight, all that sort of stuff. And so every enemy has a little icon over their head. And if it's like an orange kind of sign, then it means you haven't killed enough of them. And then eventually, when you kill enough of them, it will do a big tick as well. So like, I'm going around the world and I'm just killing all the enemies until they all have ticks over their head. And it's such a dumb thing, but this tick like somehow made me want to do everything in this game. And I didn't 100% complete it, but what I did do was I basically did all of the kind of like, I found all the treasure chests, I found all of the like interesting viewpoints and that sort of stuff, like all the locations and the fast travel points, and the game just gives you stuff for it. It's like, hey, have some more stuff to level up your skills, right? Have some more stuff to level up your affinity chart, and it all feeds into each other in a really nice synergistic way. And I think because so much of this game for me and so much of this series is about just walking around the place and taking it in and just like listening to the music as you just like fight against creatures and explore and find places, like it just gave me more of an excuse to hang out in the world, and I think that's why it works so well. And there's extra like new mechanics here, very slight stuff where in the base Xenoblade 3 there are these kind of wires that you can slide across, and they are like traversal things, and it's like an ability that you unlock later, and you can like get across the world with them. They introduce ether wires now, which are basically just like, they're wires, but they're made out of just the ether that's part of this world, and so you kind of slide on those now. So part of this is rebuilding that infrastructure. It's making points where you can travel to a spot you weren't able to get to, and so it's like adding to the exploration. There's also ladders that you can rebuild and masts that you can put up, and those masts will kind of do a big ping of the map of that area, and it will show all the question marks that you have. So you're like, oh great, now I can go and find where these last few chests are in this area. So getting that completion percentage, I didn't 100% everything, but like I got very, very close to it. And the only stuff that I didn't do was the unique monsters that were like way too high level. Like I think I ended the game about level 60ish, and there's a unique monster that's level 100. I'm like, well, that's one thing I'm just not going to do, because that just involves going and grinding levels up in order to fight that boss, because it's a super boss or whatever. So like, but aside from that, I did pretty much fucking everything in this game, and I think that's testament to the way that they've designed it, the way that they've kind of, I don't know, psychologically blackmailed my brain in order to want to do all this stuff. But it was super satisfying, and like I said, like the music in Xenoblade is such a special part of the experience and part of why I connect with it so much. There is an elevator that you get out of. You get up to the Aurora shelf, which is like the first big open space, and the music slowly, subtly comes in, and it is one of the best tracks in the series. And the way that it weaves, and the way that it just fucking, the melody comes in, it's nostalgic, but it's modern and new at the same time. It is an incredible track, and for the remainder of my time playing this game, I would just be whistling to myself as the track happened constantly. I'm just like, my parents were probably like, what the fuck where's this noise coming from? And I'm just like whistling along, headphones in, whistling along to this music while I was back home playing this. And it was just tremendous. It's just such a comfortable game experience for me, the Xenoblade world. It's so easy, and I think like the combat in 3 in particular is so streamlined, and there's depth to it, but it's like in a fun way where you have to do a lot of setup, I think, in terms of your character build usually, but like generally when it comes to going through it, there's kind of like, there's almost a rhythmical nature to it because of the idea of cancelling attacks, where when a character does their auto attack and it's about to connect, or when it just exactly connects, if you press a button at the right time, it cancels, and then you can cancel that into another move, and the positional aspect of it, it does almost feel like a rhythm game at points of just like bang, 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 and just waiting for the recharge and seeing what people are doing, rezzing people, that sort of stuff. There's a real cadence to it I think works well, and this DLC also adds a kind of new wrinkle to it, where instead of having the kind of like the mech stuff where you kind of fuse together, you have these unity combos, which is basically 2 characters do an attack together, and you can change who those characters are, so you have a bit more flexibility with it. So you could be like, oh, Shulk and Rex together, or Nicole and Glimmer together, right? And you can keep switching them up, and they all have different effects, but the way that it's built is this will do the most possible damage if an enemy is launched in the air. And the nice thing about this thing in particular is that there's a real high chance of you breaking and then toppling and then launching enemies, whereas in the other game, because all the classes are different, you would have to set it up so that your party had the ability to break, topple, and launch, and it just took a lot more, and you'd have to mix things up a lot more, whereas with the set art and the set characters here, people are getting launched all the time, so it feels like they built it in a way where, like, okay, you're going to be launching enemies constantly, we have to have a system that deals with that and makes it so that you want to get them into a launch state, and then there's multiple things you can do. You can either chain attack in that launch state, or you can use a unity combo on them, and so like it's this nice cadence where you're always working to like get into that launch state, and then from there, that's where you can do the big damage. So has a really nice impact on the combat. And I think it's a unique, interesting approach that they kind of streamlined a little bit more in this as opposed to the previous entry. So yeah, there's a lot going on. I think that it's just like, I wish I would take one of these every year and I would be happy, like just
well, at the rate they develop Monolith Soft,
right,
it's got a good chance of that, right?
Definitely. And like I'm very thankful that like my series that I really enjoy that have started to get the limelight a lot more, like Xenoblade and Fire Emblem, and I'm not in the era of back in the day where those weren't coming out, and it's gravy, man. It's all gravy.
We've been in the gravy era for those 2 series for quite some time now.
Yeah, exactly.
Give me the Advance Wars F-Zero era. That's why.
Well, it's starting. It's the embers are lighting somewhat, but yeah, it's just like such a fantastic series. It's one of my favorite. Like, I think I like Xenoblade more than Fire Emblem at this point. I think Xenoblade is like maybe my favorite Nintendo series. Like, Zelda is obviously like pretty untouchable in a lot of ways.
Mario,
but yeah, like, oh god, yeah, Mario can get fucked. Xenoblade is like way above Mario for me, absolutely. Like, I adore this series. I think it's so good, and I think part of it is that like you don't get narrative from Nintendo, and it's like the one series that does narrative and does it really well, like impactful story moments, like great characters, like it's just really exceptionally well done stuff, and it all just ties together, and like every single aspect, I love every aspect of it, and I think that's why it stands out so clearly for me and so strongly, and so yeah, this is the end of a journey. It's the end of a decade journey, and this story is fully wrapped up. It puts a nice bow on top of it, and And yeah, like I'm fascinated to see what they do next, because clearly the name Xenoblade is very popular at this point in time, so they'd be stupid to move away from that as a naming convention. So I'm sure whatever the next thing is called, it's going to have the Xenoblade name on it, but it won't be the Klaus saga, right? It won't be the story of the man and his hubris, who decided to do an experiment and then split the world into two universes, right? It's not going to be based on that entire kind of idea, and I think that's exciting. And yeah, I want to see what else wild stuff that Takahashi and his team come up with. So yeah, all good for me. Yeah, shout out to Xenoblade as it sets sail for the final time. There you go. Xenoblade Chronicles 3.
It'll be back.
It'll be back next year. Yeah, here we go. Bally, from my favorite RPG series to your favorite RPG series, you have finally come to the end of your journey.
And boy, has it cemented itself as my favorite RPG series, because wow, like you talked about, you just played 25 hours of Xenoblade 3 in like a week. I did about the same with Octopath Traveler 2. So I did it. I beat it. It took me 83 hours, and I obviously started the day it came out.
So my question on that is, I think it took you closer to 87 just looking at your Switch timer, because your Switch says 85 and then the demo says 2 hours. So you've done at least 87 hours, maybe more.
Right, but that's because it's like Super Metroid time. It's your in-game clock is based on you not dying. So there's times where you die and restart on a boss, and that's not accounted for in the gameplay.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. It was closer to 87 than 83. But yeah, it became my fourth most played game on Switch after Breath of the Wild, Animal Crossing,
coming
and
for the
Rocket
crown.
League.
Yeah, I should quickly mention as well, Xenoblade is dangerous. Like, I'm at 145 hours now in Xenoblade, and I think my Animal Crossing is also at 145.
So it's number 2.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back in and I'm just going to finish off those side quests from the main game that I haven't done, just to make it my number 1. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do that.
But yeah, Octopath 2 beat Stardew Valley, which is wild for me and the number of JRPGs I play. So people know that I was skeptical. Reviews were pretty positive on the ending and the way that the paths come together, and that was a big criticism of the first game, including from me, where I didn't like that the first game, the ways that the paths came together in the first game was very much post-game, post-credits. You had to be level 75. I looked up all this stuff about how the stories came together, and there was a big bad final boss. The boss was miserably difficult. I never bothered doing it. The ways the stories came together was decent, but to 90% of players who played that game were probably unaware it even happened. So the fact that you do not get credits after defeating the final chapter of each character in Octopath 2, which I like, because that does happen in Octopath 1. I saw the credits 8 times. This game, you just get a fin. You get like the finished kind of screen of the character that you finished their story, and then the game rolls on. And like the way the game rolls on from those final character screens to the credits, I actually thought was really well done. Like, there were moments that were very difficult. I was skeptical it would stick the landing from a narrative perspective, but both from a narrative perspective and a mechanics perspective in terms of difficulty, it was just the right level of narrative that I needed, and it was the right level of difficulty. Like, it wasn't like blow your brains out, this is impossible kind of standard Square Enix JRPG bullshit that just thumps you. Although I was feeling that after the first couple of attempts at the final boss, but I can safely say they do a good job of getting it all, wrapping it all up, and putting a bow on what is honestly just an incredible game. It's so impressive. Without spoiling anything, I do think that there's a couple of characters that like things are implied and then the game doesn't explicitly say. So like people were saying certain things about certain characters online, and I was like, oh yeah, of course, that makes sense. But then the game didn't explicitly say it. So maybe I would have liked the story to be a bit more explicit in a couple of those points that would have been really like, oh wow, okay, right, so the game's confirming that. But it still works for me. I think they do a good job, and I think that like the final boss, I went in like first time, and I played against that final boss maybe 3 to 4 times and pretty handily got my ass kicked. And it's one of those things where I went away to grind for about an hour. And I should say that over the course of 83, 87 hours, however long it was, I probably spent about 3 to 4 hours, maybe 5 hours max grinding in the whole game. So I'm going to say the grind, in my opinion, there is grinding there if you want to defeat these bosses sort of not comfortably, but have a decent chance. But I'm sure there's better players than me who can defeat these bosses at far lower levels. But I will just put it out there. I don't think this game is grind free, if that's what you're looking for. I think there's a little bit in there, but I don't actually, it didn't bother me at all. I was happy.
Though it does sound like the tools they give you if you want to grind are much better than the first game, in the sense of the night mode increases, difficulty, but also experience, and then you can also just fast forward things battles, and skip through. So if you do want to put your nose to it, it sounds like there's much more efficient ways of doing it. Because I remember with the first game, I was like, where the fuck do I even go to level up? It didn't by the end of the game, I was like, where's an area where there's high level guys for me to fight? It was never well kind of instructed to me what I was supposed to do. But I don't know, it sounds like it's easier to just do that here.
And when I went away to grind, it was to level up the 4 weakest characters in my party to level 50. And so the lowest level character in my party was level 50, the highest was 67, and then there were 3 characters over 60 and 3 characters under 60. And I beat the final boss first time after doing that grind.
Oh, wow.
Now,
okay.
I must admit, I did also look up a couple of tactics online. Nothing overly fancy or anything, but just a couple of fairly obvious things. I was like, oh, that makes sense. I'll tool that up in my party and then thump the boss first time. And again, without spoiling anything, there's something so epic that this game does with the final boss, and the way that they utilize the 8 characters that I think the first game did, but I think they render it better in this game. And I think it just, the production, the music, the final boss, it just really sung for me in that final. And when that final blow I did, defeated the boss, and it's one of my favorite feelings in video games, honestly, after such a long journey. And that's kind of what JRPGs are all about. It's
totally, yeah.
The long journey, the endurance, the struggle, the difficulty, and then boom, you get over that moment. And maybe that's defending why Square Enix makes some of their final bosses so bloody damn difficult, because you get that moment and it's just elation. But yeah, I think that making this game have a final boss that isn't a grind to level 75 or 80 is super welcome. Although this game, I mean, to be honest, this game also has a final boss if you want to do it. And I don't want to do that because I saw credits. I think the stories came together in a way that satisfied me, and I'm super happy. And like I already said, I'm so glad this game has that. So I did look up a couple of tips, as I said, but I was really satisfied with the challenge overall. Like I said, I'm going to claim this is my favorite JRPG ever. It does improve on a number of weaknesses from the first game. I won't say all of them. And maybe they had to leave a couple of weaknesses just so they can iron those out for Octopath 3. So, I'm so damn ready for more of this series. I think they are onto a winner, and it's taking the classic, joy of traditional JRPGs and just doing it with a modern twist. HD 3D is one of my favorite art styles, honestly, and I couldn't be much happier with this game. It was a slog at times. It was a long game, especially fitting it in around having a baby. But I beat Horizon last year, beat this game this year already. Got Tears of the Kingdom coming. I'm knocking out the big games, as much as those don't include Elden Ring for the time being. But I'm getting there. I was really impressed. Shall I do a quick ranking of the stories?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so for those interested in Octopath Traveler 2, the best story, in my opinion, is Throne, followed by Casti, then Temenos, then Hikari, then Oswald, then Partitio, and then the 2 at the bottom, Agnia and Hachette. A couple of at the bottom weren't that great, but even Partitio's I really, really, really enjoyed. And I will defend Agnia's and Hachette's in the sense that I think those 2 stories go to some of the coolest locations in the game, even if the stories aren't actually overly interesting. And yeah, MBZ, when we went for Korean barbecue, I entrusted you with my copy of this incredible JRPG. So if you do get any time in 2023, which is tricky because it's a busy year in terms of everything that we're doing and games coming out. But you never know, you might get a little 80 hours here and 80 hours there.
Also, I feel like I could do it in 60. I feel like I am a bit more ruthless when it comes to like just skipping through dialogue and like getting to places and being more efficient about stuff. And I'll probably look some stuff up as well to help with like just getting things going, you know. So I feel like I could get through it. But yeah, I obviously I really enjoyed the demo stuff, and I think those stories had a lot of potential. And hearing from you that they do pay off is like, yeah, that's exciting. Like I want to see what they do with that stuff. So I will start it, get back to it, I think, because I'll probably load up my demo save and kind of continue from there. But very, very interested to see where this game goes, and definitely want to play it before the end of the year so we can chat about it at the end of the year, and I can give my thoughts on it, even if I don't manage to wrap it up. But it would be good to at least get a good amount of time into Octopath 2.
One thing I need to just really hammer home is the thing that backs up these stories, I think, that the first game didn't do at all, is they just play with the camera perspective so well with this game, where they'll lower it and raise it, and it can act like a drone on the world sometimes, and like they do these interesting perspectives combined with the music that it creates the most cinematics. We talked a bit about this with Live last year actually, but like
they definitely leaned a little bit into that. They really
play with it with this, where it creates some of the most cinematic scenes I've ever seen in games that involve pixel art. Like it just brings so much energy and life to the characters and what they're saying, and like the stories that they're on, and it kind of like is a great showcase of the world, because they've put so much effort into this world. And there are just some really, and a lot of these moments are very cheesy in true JRPG fashion, but like they really make what is ultimately a top-down JRPG just hit a lot harder. And I think Live did a good job, and this game is another one that just, they are really nailing HD2D.
Yeah.
I call it HD3D.
It's
That's like
2D,
every other game ever. But
yeah, exactly.
HD2D, like they're really nailing it. And I'm up for Dragon Quest 3 remake or whatever it is. And you know, I do think Octopath Traveler 3 will come. I'm sure this game is selling absolutely fine. And yeah, it's one of my favorite games on Switch. Honestly, it's that good, and it's currently my game of the year, but I'm sure there's a few games that might knock it off top spot.
We'll see. It's definitely some stuff.
It's just really impressive stuff, and I'm not the easiest person to please when it comes to JRPGs, so I think...
Oh, we know.
But like Octopath 2, honestly, I can't recommend it highly enough. You've just got to go for it. It's long, it's enduring, but those 8 stories are actually all feel fulfilling in a way that makes... it's ultimately like 8 to 10 hour stories to some degree. Like it really does feel like that. There's real substantial twists and turns, and like the way they break up the chapters compared to the first game, it's a lot less monotonous. It's a lot more twist and turn, and like I said, with a character like Throne, you think it's all wrapped up by the end of chapter 3 or 4 and then there's like a final chapter, and there's another, and then there's like, and another thing. Oh yeah, and one more thing. And that happens on a number of characters that you think, oh right, wow, okay, I like the way they're doing that. That is some great storytelling. I'm impressed.
I like that idea of kind of elevating the kind of cinematic aspect of it, using the camera in cool ways, especially because you think about, like, I was so impressed with Final Fantasy VI and what that was able to achieve from a 2D perspective, and it feels like these games have been knocking against that barrier for so long, and what HD 2D provides is a way to break through the barrier in a way, right? And kind of provide a little more, I'd say, production value in a sense that you only was a bit more left to your imagination, despite the effort. The opera scene from Final Fantasy VI is iconic, and like the way that they do it, and all the setup and all the music and everything that just comes together so wonderfully. But I think that there's a way in which they're leveraging this tech here to kind of push it to the next level, which I think is very cool.
It's a coming together of incredible music, incredible world design, unbelievable pixel art, which also still needs a shout out. Like these are still pixel art characters. They look incredible. And then the soundtrack, the look, the camera angle, it all just comes together like in this really impressive way, and in particular a few of those cutscenes. I was gonna like spatter all these images out all over Twitter, but they are a little bit spoilery.
I'm sure super spoilery.
I have seen other people doing it, and I've admired them. But yeah, I won't do it myself. But God, there's some good looking locations in this game.
Yeah, totally. I'm interested as well. Which soundtrack do you rate higher, the first game or the second game? I've heard less people talk about this second soundtrack compared to the first one, I think.
Most people that I've read online are just like, it matches it. And if I was so I've actually, I've got a request for the changeover music. Is Partitio's theme.
Well, you're struggling today because we're talking about Xenoblade 3, so I don't know if I can manage that. Maybe we do a double music.
Right, double music.
Center.
Yes.
We'll see. Yeah.
But Partitio's theme in particular is just some absolute slapping jazz saxophone. It's so good. I maybe recency biased, but I'm siding with 2, honestly. Like,
wow, God, man, that first game soundtrack is so fucking good. It's really hard to beat.
1 is really good too. Maybe it's a score draw. I can't decide, honestly. But
well, I mean, the fact that you're having trouble deciding says a lot for it, I think.
Yeah. But maybe also this music hits harder because of some of those cinematic moments I've described as well. So I think the first game's maybe doing more with less in part. But yeah, it's just such I taking the traditional classic JRPG and applying this level of polish and splendor. It just really feels like, I described it before, as like the Rolls Royce of JRPGs. It's just like something old, but it's just so grand and just so impressive. And it's not revolutionizing the genre perhaps, but it's doing cool things, and it deserves a shout out. And well, I'm sure we'll talk about it in Game of the Year.
Well, it's definitely got more than a shout out on this show.
Oh yeah.
I'll say so. Very cool. Well, there you go. That wraps it up finally. I'm sure we'll be talking about it more at the end of the year. But that is going to do us for the first segment of today's show. We'll be back after this break to talk about your emails that you sent through to us. See you in a bit.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the second part of today's show. It's that time again. It is time for the emails. But before I get to the emails, MBZ, I've got to do one thing.
What is that?
I have to tell everyone the email address.
Well, tell us it then, please.
ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. Please send in your emails. We always need more. The well's looking pretty dry right now, so
yeah, it's always dry.
It's always
even
dry.
Even when it's full, it's actually dry. So everybody just write in right now, wherever you are in the world. Even if you're driving, dictate it to Google. Say the name of the podcast, the address, and they'll send it for you. It's great. Technology is amazing these days. You can just say things and it will just happen. But yeah, you can also hop over to our Discord server and leave a little email there in our thread if you want to as well. So multiple options available to you.
Exactly. Our first email this time is from Chad, who's from Nebraska. And Chad wanted to say that in Nebraska, cows outnumber people 3-1.
That's a lot of beef,
wild.
man.
That
It's a
is
lot of
wild.
beef. So I'm sure you're eating well in Nebraska.
Chad says, hey guys, for some reason, the holidays always make me a little nostalgic for old games and systems. I have great memories of video game related gifts and of course playing games with friends and family. My parents still have a functioning Atari 2600 at their house, but it's been a long time since we hooked it up. This made me wonder, what is the oldest video game you've played? And also, what's the oldest you've actually enjoyed? Your ambivalence towards NES games is pretty well documented. I have 3 recommendations for Atari games to try for like 5 minutes because they're not that good, but I had hours of fun with each of them. Number 1, River Raid. Fly a jet and blow stuff up, but don't run out of gas. Pitfall. Really just to hear the Tarzan music when you swing across a pond full of alligators. Stampede. This is kind of a deep cut. You have to rope/herd cows. Gets fast and difficult, even if you have a good pattern down. Of course, they're all way better with the original joystick, but keyboards work too. Thanks, Chad.
Awesome. Yeah, video games go back a ways, but I feel like older video games are they're just like, if you were there at the time, it was just like a magical experience, right? It's like, wow, this thing is insane.
Like the Beatles.
Yeah, like the Beatles. And the further, which we've established many times on this show, the further away you get from it. Like, for example, I don't know, I feel like kids going back to like even, I don't know, PS1 games these days, they'd be like, woof, this is really hard. I can't, this is a video game? What? Like, we've just come so far in such a short period of time, from like many perspectives, from visual perspectives, obviously, but just like controls and like narrative and so many elements. So it's always hard to go back, but I don't know, I've always been interested in the history of games and going back and playing older stuff, and I like that the Switch Online kind of exists as a way to easily dip in and out of those types of things. But obviously that only goes back so far, right? Like the NES was not the start of video games. There's stuff before that, and there's lots of even older stuff, especially through PCs and classic systems in the UK, right? Because of course, in the UK, Nintendo was never that big, and many of the game stuff that came up back in the day was home computer stuff, right? Through Ataris, Amigas, all that sort of thing. The ZX Spectrum, a big deal. Obviously, everyone knows Ultimate Play the Game, which was Rare's original name as a studio, and Rare did a lot of ZX Spectrum stuff. It's really cool if you have Rare Replay, because you can play a bunch of their Spectrum stuff on Rare Replay. And I've not played any of the Spectrum stuff, but I've watched people play it, and it's just so unbelievably primitive, but in a way that's kind of charming, in a way that I appreciate, and I can see why people were into it back in the day when there was literally nothing else to do. But yeah, it just makes it very difficult to think about going back to that stuff these days. And I owned a Amiga. It was my cousin's Amiga.
What year did that come out in the UK?
Good question. I think it must be mid-80s of some kind, because he's 10 years older than me. So when he was like 18, he was giving it to me. So he must have grown up with it at the age of 10, which would have been like the start of the 90s, end of the 80s probably. So I don't think it's like super duper old, because when you think about it, like Super Mario Brothers, the original, is 1985, I believe. So I think some of the Amiga games I was playing were probably actually post that, right? Like, I mean, stuff like Afterburner 2 would have been, it's more like 3D as well, right? So it's actually kind of a bit more advanced, and like I think like a lot of stuff I was playing was actually a bit more advanced than even the early NES stuff. So it may well be that some of the older stuff that I've played is just like, I don't know. I mean, this is the thing, right? Everyone's played Pac-Man, and Pac-Man is like an arcade classic, like 1980,
right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's probably like Pong as well. Like, I've probably played Pong in some form, so technically like that was quote unquote, or Tennis for Two, I guess, the first game, right?
What's the oldest one that you enjoyed?
That I enjoyed is a good question. Yeah, because I mean, there was a lot of stuff on the Amiga that I did really enjoy.
We had a good time. Me coming around to your house, you'd be like, Bally, check out this shit. I'm like, this is old as hell, but it's fun. And there's that penguin called Mr. James Pond.
James Pond. Shout out to James Pond, of course, a classic of the era. James Pond was a good one. I've gone back and looked at James Pond in a modern lens and have been like, woof, wow, why Well, I think this
we were
was good
easily
at all.
pleased back then.
Oh, of course, yeah, of course. But yeah, the thing was, my cousin had just like a stack of games, stuff like Whizball, which was it was like you were on this planet and you were this green ball and you would bounce.
It's a 2D platformer where you're a bouncing ball.
Yeah, I wouldn't even call it a platformer necessarily.
No?
You weren't really jumping on stuff. You were just kind of moving from screen to screen, and I think avoiding obstacles, I want to say, and like avoiding things shooting at you, and like, you know, I think you could upgrade and like start shooting yourself and that sort of thing. So it was almost like a bit of a mixture between like a shoot 'em up and a kind of weird bouncing around platformer. But yeah, you were just this green faced ball who would roll around, and I enjoyed that a great deal. We played a good amount of that. There's the Simpsons game, the bot versus the aliens, which I think also came to console platforms. Like, there's a lot of these games that were on consoles as well.
Already not a port of an arcade anyway. Like,
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was partially a port of an arcade game. But like stuff like oh gosh, what was it? I mean, Afterburner, I think, was on Mega Drive, Afterburner 2. There was a Thundercats game that I was very into as well. There was a side-scrolling action platformer that was quite good. Yeah, lots of different things from the Amiga that I enjoyed. The one that came out recently, so we're having a chat at work about some of this old stuff, and it just jogged my memory of a game called Dizzy, Treasure Island Dizzy. I don't remember if I ever played this one with you, Bally, but Dizzy is this character who's basically an egg. He's just like an egg with like Rayman arms and legs where they don't actually attach to him. They just kind of like float near him. And
easier to render.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and it was a side-scrolling platformer where you'd go to this treasure island, and I think the version that I played was actually a bit of an upgraded version, because looking at the Spectrum version of Treasure Island Dizzy seems much more primitive, whereas I think the same for Whizball, like the version that I played on the Amiga felt like more graphically upgraded versions of those games. So I wonder if that was the case, because the Spectrum could only display like a set of colors, and the Spectrum has a very iconic color set as well. It's like lots of purple. You'll see this if you play the classic stuff on Rare Replay. Is like all those games look very similar visually because it was only able to do those like few different colors, and so like purple was one that stood out a lot when it came down to those types of things. So yeah, I think I'm looking at it now. Treasure Island Dizzy, the version I played, looked quite different. It's almost like a Super Nintendo jump from NES, right? From the Spectrum version to the Amiga version. So it almost is like a completely remastered game. And yeah, this is one of those characters that just like this mascot that just got forgotten by time. And it wasn't very good. Like, I remember the jump feeling really off and weird, but there was a charm to it. There was like I just very clearly remember you start off and you start going to this like tree house like on the island, and it's like tropical, and you're bouncing on these kind of I don't know, these wooden bridges, and it very just hits me nostalgically a lot just looking back on this game. And I think, I'm not sure when the original version came out, but it looks like it was about 1989 for the Spectrum version. So I imagine that the one that I played on the Amiga was actually a bit later. So weirdly, these games that I think are older are probably not as old as like original Mario, which I think, was even a few years. 85, yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I enjoyed them at the time. I would say going back to them is questionable about whether I would enjoy them now. Like, I did download, before the eShop closed, I downloaded the 3D version of Afterburner 2. I will say, I think Afterburner 2 actually probably does hold up really well, because that game was like, it was really well made. It was just like, it was basically Star Fox, and it had great kind of visuals to it and a real sense of momentum, and it was one of those games that I could actually get decently far in. I could get at least to like the 3rd or 4th level before dying, which tended not to be the case with most games of this era back when I played them. So yeah, I think Afterburner 2 is definitely one that I would say as a really old game that I think is an old game that holds up quite well. I would say that's pretty up there.
I think you would say Afterburner holds up. I think the answer to a game that is one of the oldest games I've played, and certainly the oldest one that I enjoyed, is a game that you actually love, and that is Mega Man 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is 1988. So like,
oh shit, okay.
That is old. Like, obviously NES, so like, it's old. Like, 1988 is really old in my book, because we've said so many times on the show how so many NES games are by and large just a little bit too old for us. Like they're just so inferior in our opinion often to say Super Nintendo games. And we've talked about many Super Nintendo games on this show that we've had such a good time, and it's only like 5 to 10 years later for those Super Nintendo games, and like the jump feels so stark.
It's huge, yeah. It's also because we grew up with the GBA, and Super Nintendo and GBA are very akin to each other in terms of style, visually, and like, you know,
not counting all the Super Nintendo ports on GBA.
Of course, yeah.
Final Fantasy, not that I played that version, but Yoshi's Island, and Super Mario World. Like
every Mario game was
every
a
Mario
remake
game ever.
on there,
Yeah,
so,
yeah. But my comfortable answer would probably be Mega Man 2, and the oldest, which I probably didn't enjoy, I guess, similar to you, is probably Pac-Man in 1980. And
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I enjoy Pac-Man, but it's not something I would go and seek out to play. I actually recently played Pac-Man on my plane to the US. Like, they had, one of those game / TV things,
they're woeful,
right?
aren't they? Those
they're
things
so bad. Oh my god! Like the D-pad, I was trying to like move around. I was like, I didn't press up, I pressed left, and you're going up instead, and it's like really terrible input lag and all that sort of stuff. You could play it multiplayer though. I was like, oh, Patrick, do you want to play some Pac-Man? He's like, no, I'm watching a movie. I was like, right.
Okay, here's a bugbear of mine, right? Virgin Atlantic did this back in the day, so I don't know who did it at Virgin Atlantic or whatever, but they had Super Nintendos on the planes. Like, they identified that, hey,
really?
Nintendos are actually good. Let's put Super Nintendo. Yep, they had them on the planes.
What the fuck, dude?
I do not understand why these plane companies can't just do deals with any, whether it's an Xbox, a PlayStation, Nintendo, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Why they can't do some sort of deal, because isn't that A, it entertains your audience, but B, it promotes those consoles, surely. Like, isn't it a win-win? Isn't it just like an advertising deal? I don't understand why this isn't a thing.
I guess I don't know, like what the tech involved would be, like how the problem is, like how powerful can you get, like what generation do you use for
but I mean, like,
TVs?
I've been at so many hotels in the States when I was younger, and there was a PlayStation 1 you could rent. So like this thing is plugged into your hotel TV, and there's some sort of software that obviously got agreed with Sony and PlayStation, where you pay money to the hotel and you get 2 hours of Crash Bandicoot, and that was great. This was like, I'm on holiday and I'm playing Crash Bandicoot. This is fantastic. Obviously, I didn't own a PlayStation, so this was a big deal. So the idea that you have planes, anyway, I'm going off on a tangent.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think in another respect though, like, the types of people who would play that stuff are also the type of people who probably brought their Switch or their Steam Deck on the plane. So it's kind of like a moot thing in a way.
But how many casual gamers would love just a bit of FIFA or
something?
Yeah,
totally.
Like, they'd love a bit of that.
Yeah, as long as
Gran Turismo, why not?
Yeah, if they could make it like the modern-ish iterations of those, that would help. Obviously, if it was like, I don't know, Football Manager, you could probably run on one of those, I would imagine. Probably not the best game for playing for like a long-term thing, but, you know, people like those.
But you're right. Say it was a PlayStation 5. Where would that even fit in?
How do you, like, for every seat? Yeah, that seems like a bit of a nightmare, basically. But
so Pac-Man it is.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. There's lots of really old games that I've probably touched at one point in time, but again, it's more from a historical curiosity standpoint, and that's usually where I come from with these things. Is I played a bunch of stuff on the Switch Online service, and a lot of it is just not very good. Like, I played fucking Jelly Boy, right? And I was just watching the Hyrule Hustle 2 on Giant Bomb, where they have to race through Breath of the Wild, and so some of the challenges Dan sets is like, oh, you died, now you have to go and play a game on the old NES and Super Nintendo service, and he made them play Jelly Boy, and I was like, yeah, I remember playing a bit of this when that came to the service, and man, Jelly Boy fucking sucks. That game is ass. Like, it is so bad. And yeah, I mean, the nice thing about having those games accessible is you don't have to spend like 10 quid just to see the history. You can just have it there, which I think is the nice part of it. Of like, everyone complains of like, oh, these are all, I've never heard of this game, and I'm like, that's what I want. I want those games because I want to have an excuse to check out some weird shit that I wouldn't have paid money for, right? Like, I'm going to pay money for Link to the Past on Virtual Console. I'm never going to fucking pay money for Jelly Boy. No one is. Exactly. Who's going to fucking buy Jelly Boy?
Both
but
have
it's
their
still
merits to be on the console, on the
totally.
Switch Online.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I'm glad that those exist because then I can come on here and tell everybody how bad Jelly Boy is, and it is weird. It's such a fucking, like, he turned into a duck in that game for no reason. Like, he just like morphs around. It's basically prototypical Kirby is what Jelly Boy is. And yeah, I don't know. It's cool. But yeah, I mean, Mega Man 2 is definitely, like, I think I count Mega Man 2 in, like, my top 50 games of all time easily. Like, that game is up there for me. So it's definitely, from a personal enjoyment level, the highest ranked old game.
Yeah, it's easily the oldest in your top 50 by, I'd say,
Yes.
3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember if I've got a classic Castlevania game in there or not. I don't think I'd put any of the, like...
I think you're talking like mid-90s by that point though, right?
Yeah, I don't know. The NES Castlevanias are a little bit
NES,
earlier.
sorry.
Yeah, so like
you're
Castlevania
right,
1
you're
and
right.
3 are a bit older. But yeah, like I generally have been someone who prefers Capcom's output and Konami's output on those consoles as opposed to Nintendo's own output. I just think they're better generally, and they just stick with me more. They're the ones that I care about a bit more. But yeah, I don't know. I think that in terms of like old games that we really, really love, like I think Super Nintendo is where that begins,
Totally.
and there's not a lot more
Like
beyond
top
that.
10 games of all time level of love. Like,
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
Big deals. Really, really great games.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think we can go back some distance, but not that far enough. And when it comes to like PC stuff, like you played some stuff back in the day, but it was more 90s, right?
Oh, that was
to anything
that was
else.
like
Yeah.
N64. A lot of games like that were on PS1 and N64, like Lego Racers, the Spider-Man game I played, this kind of thing. They were all, that era, like late 90s, early aughts.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I do want to do though, because everyone's been talking about it a lot since it came out, is I want to check out Atari 50. Because everybody's been talking about how like the documentary stuff and that is really good, and obviously like a lot of these games don't hold up. Even a lot of people who are like into classic games have been saying this about Atari 50, are like, yeah, it doesn't really hold up as a game, but the lovely thing about it is that you get all the context of what happened around the time. It's like a full-blown documentary thing, and then you kind of get to have a bit of a taste of the game. So you watch this stuff, you play a bit of the game, and then they've also like gone in and remastered and like redone a bunch of stuff as well within that collection, which I think is super cool, and like giving light to a lot of these games that I think most people would never want to play. But I think part of the joy here is just understanding the context and the history, and it gives you a bit more reverence for them as a result,
God, I'd love
being
that
able to
for
do
the
that.
NES, wouldn't you? Like, we've talked about how a lot of these NES games are we're not that into them, but like a package like that for the NES would be through the roof. I'd be ecstatic. That'd be so cool.
Yeah, and Nintendo have kind of come a little close to it, but NES Remix is an interesting idea of like reapproaching those games in a different way and kind of doing something new with them. I think is a really cool thing, but it's not quite. It doesn't have the historical record behind it that what Atari 50 is doing, and like Nintendo have never been a company to do that stuff, and I don't know, it'll probably be a while until they are comfortable ever doing it, if ever.
They are working on some sort of museum in Kyoto.
That's true, yeah.
I don't know when that is open. I don't think it'll be open in time for your visit, but
no,
I definitely need to go there one day when it eventually opens. But
yeah,
and also it'll just be the bare minimum scraping of the surface, and I'm sure Nintendo fans will still go wild for it because Nintendo fans are crazy. But I think inch by inch Nintendo might creep closer to aspects of these things.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think like you just get such little out of the Japanese game industry because I think language barrier from our side and stuff like that. But yeah, I'd love to have more of a deep dive, and if Digital Eclipse or anyone who does all these collections are able to pull that off, that would be amazing, because I know there's lots of smart people, Chris Kohler and stuff like that, who work on these type of collections, and obviously has a big history with Nintendo and knowing people there and that sort of stuff. So if that's able to happen, that would be amazing. But yeah, I do want to check out Atari 50, and like recently on RFN, Johnny Metz brought up he was playing Aka R, which is like one of those classic games that also kind of got remade as part of it, which is a really nice thing. And just there's forgotten things that Jeff Minter and those guys back in the day were making that have a chance to be reappraised in a fun kind of historic context. So I think that's cool.
Can I go off on one brief
tangent?
tangent?
Go for it.
So we're just talking about like Nintendo and the language barrier and Japan and these kinds of things. And I don't know if you listened to the most recent episode of Kit and Krista.
I have not, no.
So they just tell the most awesome stories about Nintendo and their zaniness and some awful things that Nintendo seem to keep doing. Well, Kit was leading the marketing for Nintendo of America on the video game Super Mario 3D Land back in 2011. Leading the marketing in the whole of North America, and NCL didn't think it was a good idea to even tell Kit that there was a second 8 worlds in that game.
Are you fucking kidding me?
And they kept it under, because they wanted to keep it under lock and key. We don't want anyone to know that there's basically a whole other game after the main 8 worlds. There's 8 more worlds. And they didn't even tell the head of marketing in North America about this mechanic in the game. Pretty.
I mean, I believe
an example of how under lock and key a lot of Japan can potentially sometimes get, especially Nintendo NCL. Like that is just mind-blowing.
That's ridiculous. And I know that people for reviews for that were also not allowed to talk about that in their reviews either.
Yeah, I mean, I might defend them on that, but the idea that the head of marketing of Nintendo from the whole of North America isn't even allowed to know that is, but yeah.
That's bonkers. Yeah, that's absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, I think it explains a lot about Nintendo in a lot of ways. So
yeah.
Anyway, all games are cool, and I'll continue to play them just from a interested perspective. But yeah, it's hard to find like full enjoyment in those if you didn't grow up during the time.
Yeah. Plus, there's so much new great stuff we're also trying to play. It's hard to keep up with.
And then they just remake the old stuff, and you're like, well, you don't have to play.
Might as well play that one.
Yeah, don't have to play Final Fantasy VII Original anymore. You've got this fancy shiny thing now.
So shiny.
Yeah.
So shiny. Our next email is from Tim, and this one's actually on Discord. Says, "Hey guys, the recent surprise Xenoblade 3 and Fire Emblem Engage rapid DLC drops, the critical acclaim of the delicious last course last year, the DLC turned wildly anticipated sequel that is Silk Song, the frankly insulting discourse about Tears of the Kingdom being glorified DLC, and currently playing through Persona 5 Royal has me thinking a lot about DLC lately. So my question is, what are your favorite best DLCs of all time? This isn't a topic I feel I have a ton of experience with, as I tend to avoid spending more on DLC, but nowadays there's a lot of free or bundled DLC out there that makes it more accessible without the extra cost. For me, there are 2 DLCs that are far better than anything else I've ever experienced. The Citadel DLC from Mass Effect 3 and the 2 Witcher 3 DLC expansions. In the case of ME3, it is using the DLC as a way to celebrate the characters that are so crucial to Mass Effect's story and appeal, whereas the Witcher DLCs share the same incredibly high level of storytelling present in the main game. Some might argue the DLC stories are even more interesting than a lot of the base game. Curious, as always, to hear your thoughts. Your friend, Tim. Do you love that Witcher 3 DLC?
Oh my god, like, yeah, I mean, that is probably the best DLC ever made, I would say. Like, it's almost mandatory. I don't, like, it's obviously, The Witcher 3 is a lot of video games. there's a huge amount in there, so it's not like people needed more to satiate themselves. But yeah, I think, you know, it came out, like, I think the first one 6 months after the first game, and then the second one a year after or something like that. And yeah, I mean, like, I would have argued for that second DLC, Blood and Wine, to be like a Game of the Year candidate for that year, because it was basically an entire game unto itself. It was like 30 hours long. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I think it's interesting because Nintendo have only recently lent into DLC as an idea, right? It's only from the Wii U onwards that they have got into it, because prior to that, the Wii obviously didn't have the functionality to do DLC, just the way that memory worked on that system. Like, so when this idea was in its infancy during the 360 era, like, Nintendo weren't doing anything with it because they couldn't, essentially. Their systems weren't built for it. So I think, like, 3DS and Wii U is the first time that they dipped into it, and Wii U more so, I think, than 3DS, but they still didn't do a huge amount. There's obviously the big standout examples, but there's a lot these days, and they seem to do it with pretty much most of their big releases, right? Like, it's rare to have a Nintendo game that now doesn't have something tied to it. Even if it's just like a free thing, like obviously we'd never got DLC for Mario Odyssey, which is kind of a crime, I think.
We got like the free upgrades.
That's what I was gonna say.
Luigi balloon.
Yeah, the balloon stuff, which was so bad, like
So
no one
bad.
cared about it. It doesn't count as DLC. It's like it's more of a free update, I guess.
like
It
a free
depends what your
update, yeah.
depends what your definition of DLC is. Here's the interesting thing: CD Projekt Red kind of has a different understanding, or at least at the time they had a different understanding of what the idea of DLC was. So they were like, oh yes, Witcher 3 comes with like 7 free DLCs, and what they meant by that was like, oh, you get a different costume for Yennefer and for Triss, and also your horse has, and they're like, this is a DLC. And like I think that's kind of a holdover from what DLC originally was conceived as, which was it's kind of more smaller it's basically what microtransactions are these days. Like there was a huge hubbub around Oblivion and horse armor was a big thing that people were up in arms about back in the day, of like, you're gonna charge me £5 for fucking armor on my horse, and now nobody fucking blinks an eyelid at that. It's just like, oh yeah, that's microtransactions, that's in every video game, and it's like the most normalized thing possible. But yeah, what Tim is calling DLC here for Witcher, CD Projekt would refer to that as an expansion, like the traditional kind of PC style of expansion, which I think, that stuff has existed for a very long time, right? The idea of DLC almost exists from the PC space, and expansions happening I mean, obviously MMOs back in the day, like World of Warcraft, but I think older PC games had the idea of an expansion being something that kind of extended the life of the game, or even when you're talking about, freeware and stuff and trading stuff, like additional Doom levels that people traded back in the day. So there's a deep history of that in the PC space. But yeah, I think Nintendo, obviously late to the party as ever with DLC. But they've had some good stuff, and obviously I think like the cream of the crop is the Smash character DLC. It's like that is probably the best Nintendo DLC of all time, just because, and it's also like good value for money, I think, as well. Like it's like a lot of amazing new things being thrown in alongside all the music and all that sort of stuff. I think that one definitely stands out from Nintendo's perspective as a high bar. But yeah, I mean, they've done a lot in recent times. There are any that have stood out to you, Bally? Obviously, you have less experience with the other platforms and DLC, but
yeah, massively. But like, I think from a Nintendo perspective, you got to give credit to the Mario Kart DLC, like especially those first batch of, was it 8 courses?
Yeah, the Wii U DLC for Mario Kart 8.
Like,
yeah,
incredible stuff. And there's like Animal Crossing tracks, F-Zero tracks. This is insane. And they still also need credit for like the tracks that are coming out at the moment. Like some of those are still really great. We were waxing lyrical about that Yoshi's Island track, which is just so great. Really good stuff. Maybe it's a little bit of recency bias, and I must admit I've not actually played a ton of DLC. I did enjoy Spider-Man back in 2018. That was like one of my first experiences.
Oh, right, you played through all the DLC for that, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I mean, it was good, but like, I've got to give it to the Delicious Last Course. That might be my favorite DLC of all time.
It's almost better than the main game in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, it was leaner. Those bosses were fantastic. It was just so, not just the bosses, but I loved the chess piece boss, like side bosses as it were.
Yeah, the additional kind of platforming kind of challenge bosses.
DLC to the DLC. Yeah, it's just like really cool. Like I was, obviously that DLC took ages to come out, but there's a lot to talk about last year, but I think it speaks volumes that we kind of counted that as like a main game, as it were, even though it was DLC in our kind of games of the year list. Like I think that speaks to like just how strong that DLC was. I was really blown away by it. And DLC generally, I'm, as you say, MBZ, like Nintendo are quite new to the party, and yes, I played like Breath of the Wild DLC. I think some of the shrines in the DLC for Breath of the Wild were very strong. They were some of the best shrines.
That dungeon is probably the best dungeon in the game.
That dungeon is great, yeah. It's easy to forget that now here in like 2023. That, yeah, Breath of the Wild had great DLC, like 2 waves. I'd also say, I'm very much looking forward to trying Horizon Forbidden West Burning Shores later this year, maybe, if I
did you play Frozen Wilds at all?
I didn't. I liked Horizon Zero Dawn a lot, but I was just not up for that DLC. And as I've discussed on our non-Nintendo show, how into I've been with Forbidden West and its side quests and its like I spent 80 hours in that game. I think I beat the first Horizon in like 20, 30 hours. Like I really like mainlined it. The fact that I'm so up for all the extra stuff is also speaking to me. Like I really want to try Burning Shores, and I've heard really strong things, especially from those who like Horizon, about Burning Shores and the way that it sets up like a potential third game. Like I'm excited to try and get to that this year. I also think it's like on the shorter side for an open world DLC. I think it's like 5 to 10 hours max. It's not like one of these 30-hour things, which, as great as it is, I'm sure Witcher 3 DLC is 30 hours, and I'm excited to eventually get to Witcher 3. I'm looking forward to Burning Shores being a bit leaner and perhaps like more story driven. It's like a little lean story thing that it seems to do. So
yeah,
looking forward to that.
I mean, at some points you have to be like, well, I mean, this is just a full video game. Like Xenoblade Future Redeemed is like, it's 25, 30 hours long. Like, I played a Space for the Unbound last week, and that was a 10-hour game, and like that's I put more than double the time into this DLC, and it's a DL, like it's pretty weird. It's just like I think certain games obviously are going to be different, and you know, big RPGs are definitely like, you know, a short RPG is 25 hours long, so that's where we are.
I need my Octopath Traveler 2 DLC. That's why.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, for me, the 2 Xenoblade, I mean, the 3 Xenoblade, I mean, all 3 games have a thing. Future Connected is the shortest, I would say, the add-on for Xenoblade 1, but like, Torna is incredible, and obviously, I absolutely love Future Redeemed, so those are definitely up there as like some of my favorites now, that I've played through all of those. The Mario plus Rabbids Donkey Kong DLC was actually really good. I enjoyed that quite a bit. I think it may have also contributed to me not playing as much of the sequel.
Sparks of Hope.
Yeah, because I did kind of play that within the same year, and I think the nice thing about that was like it introduced that new character, and it also just, because there was less customization, it felt like similar to what the Xenoblade DLC did. Like it kind of it shrinks down the possibility space a little bit, but it means that you can focus a bit more, and it means that the maps can be more specifically designed around these characters, as opposed to like in the main games for those where like you have the possibility space of being like, well, I can choose between loads of different characters, but by giving you only 3 to choose from, it's like, well, we can very much tailor all these maps, knowing that this is what you're gonna have every single time. So yeah, I think that's pretty good. One that I kind of want to go back to after playing the Splatoon 3 campaign is the Octo expansion, because I never played that, and it's available through our Nintendo Switch Online.
Right. That would be fun.
So yeah, that could be a thing to go back to. But yeah, that's one that kind of hangs there. Did you ever play the Overcooked DLC? Was that something you played?
I think I did. I think I bought like the special edition or whatever it was that came to Switch, which I think included DLC for either the first or second game. Because we got the second game at launch, so it can't have been that one. But yeah, I'm pretty sure we did the DLC. It's just more levels. I don't know how best to describe it, but yeah, it was very good. It doesn't stand out in my mind.
Yeah, I guess if it feels less disconnected because it was just a complete collection to begin with, I guess you just were like, well, this is the full game essentially.
Right,
so
exactly.
Yeah,
and that happened to a lot of Switch games near the launch of the Switch. They got kind of special editions of things like Mark of the Ninja, for example.
Right, yeah, totally. I think Dead Cells is a good example of like an independent game that constantly gets updated and has loads of stuff. I have bought one of the DLCs for Dead Cells, and it's a nice like additional wrinkle where you have different kind of paths that you can go down, which is good and kind of adds an extra layer there. But then there's a Castlevania DLC, which I really want to get to at some point. Dead Cells is one of those games that like, it's the never-ending gobstopper. It's like, roguelikes are great in that way that you can keep going back to them, and I'll just randomly pick them up from time to time and be like, yeah, I'm just going to keep going with this, and you know, just dive in and check it out every now and again. And I think Dead Cells has a great model going for them with that stuff in terms of just constantly putting out extra stuff, whether it be paid or whether it be free. Like, I think they did a whole free update that was like kind of like the indie friends kind of thing, where like they had the nail from Hollow Knight as a weapon, and like you could see those different characters from like Guacamelee and stuff, like lots of different Metroidvanias from the indie space like collaborated with Dead Cells to do a bit of crossover stuff, which I thought was very cool. But yeah, I don't know, like I feel like DLC and expansions tend to be associated with like big Western games a lot as well.
So DLC is not the most appealing thing to two people who are playing a lot of games and predominantly playing games to talk about them on a podcast, and
Sure.
lining up games to talk about Game of the Year discussions. DLC is always a little bit tricky. Like obviously we
Right.
did it with like the Delicious Last Course, but
Mhm.
as a thing, DLC isn't really the most appealing thing to me. Obviously, we've talked about, there's loads of exceptions to that I have really enjoyed the DLC, but like to me, I don't normally beat a game and then go, oh, I hope the DLC comes out. I mean, I know I said that about Octopath, but like honestly, if Octopath DLC did come out, sure, I'd play it, but part of me would be like, oh god, but I've got so many other games to play.
Yeah.
And you felt that a little bit with that Xenoblade 3 DLC. The timing of it just coming, you're like, well, that's my weekend now. I guess I have to do that because that's your job. But like, there is like a stress to like, oh god, there's games coming out of our ears right now. Do we really need DLC? Like, there's just one more thing,
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of like it in a sense because it gives us an excuse to go back to games if we do want to go. Like, I'm looking for any fucking excuse to talk about Xenoblade on this show. So, the fact that I was able to come back to it, I think is great. Like, obviously, timing, not great. Thanks, Nintendo. Maybe just get your fucking second half of the year lineup sorted so that we know what's going on, because seemingly they're just releasing everything in the first half of the year, including this, like right before it comes out. And yeah, but I think it's nice for the games that I love to return to them and to have another chance to talk about them. And it's nice, like with Mario Kart, I think it's a good thing to just check in with again, because otherwise I would have no reason to go back to Mario Kart usually. It's hard for us to like keep up with playing Smash Brothers or Mario Kart, all those types of things. And so I think having these additional extra like little reasons for us to do that, I think is actually quite nice. It's a good way to kind of continue the conversation on games that maybe have lost the conversation. And then sometimes stuff comes out and you're like, well, never actually went back to that. Like with Switch Sports, they put golf in it and we just didn't go back to it. And we planned to.
I know.
And we didn't. And they're like, all right, cool. I guess we're never playing Switch Sports again. So just exists in the ether now. If ever I want to go back to it, which I might do. I don't know. It's a fun game to get out at parties and stuff like that.
It's a good game.
Yeah. But yeah, there's certainly DLC that like I would drop anything for, and Xenoblade is one of those examples where I was like, yeah, I will literally drop everything just to play this. But those are rare. Like it's only for my very favorite games where I will.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the greatest DLC of all time coming out, Tears of the Kingdom. Like,
of course, everyone's Oh my god, like the discourse around that is so like it's so ridiculous. Like, especially as a fan of the Yakuza series, and like that entire franchise is built on the idea of reusing the same fucking place again, and that place is like way smaller than Breath of the Wild's world. But people love that, but apparently no, you can't do that for a Zelda game. So I don't know. Yeah, I that's the other thing. I feel like DLC often never really goes on sale, which I find is a bit of a barrier to entry to me as well, because I do keep an eye on sales of like what's going on and cheap and stuff like that. And I waited for a really long time to get that Donkey Kong DLC because it just didn't go on sale on its own. So I think that sometimes is a little bit of a barrier to entry as well, because sometimes I don't want to get something straight away, but I want to loop back to it. And maybe it's just a loophole thing when people are kind of deciding when to discount their games, but it feels like DLC never goes on sale. That's why I'm waiting. I want to go back to Lost Judgment and play the Kaito Files DLC on PS5, and like I keep checking it, and it's like, nope, it's still 20 quid. Still, it's not going down at all. It's never been on sale. It's like
20 quid. That's not nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, well, like, I can get Lost Judgment for like 20 quid now, but the DLC is still that price. It's like, what's going on here, man? Like, you gotta sort this shit out. So I don't know. I think that's also a little bit of a barrier to entry. But yeah, Yakuza is another great example of a series where like, yeah, I will play everything that they release. So yeah, DLC is good. I think that it's helpful to kind of continue the conversation about stuff, and certainly from a publishing perspective, DLC is very important, and just ongoing games stuff and like continuing to update stuff is very important, let me say. Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see more of this. Then we're going to continue to see Nintendo just keep putting DLC in their games, especially for ones they know they can exploit, like Fire Emblem and Xenoblade, because those fan bases are rabid.
Put more on Switch Online. Like, you're right about that I'm going to say Octopath. Octo expansion for Splatoon. Like, just stick it on there. Like, we already pay the price. Like, you
Right.
want to give it to us. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the weird thing about Xenoblade and Fire Emblem is they're like, these fan bases are so hardcore that they'll just buy it. So there's no point in us putting it on Switch Online. It's not.
They have those fan bases wrapped around their little finger, and they're
exactly. And
just churning out them games.
Here's the thing that I actually really don't like about Nintendo's DLC is they will have a piece of the DLC which is like, this is the main thing that you want. In the meantime, here's a t-shirt for Link. It's like, fuck no. What are you doing? Like, it's really there's just so much tat, right?
Yeah.
Like, it feels like that first Breath of the Wild stuff. I was like, it's kind of cool as an idea, like the whole...
The first wave was you get the line on your map, and there's like a kind of...
It's like combat challenge stuff.
Combat
like,
challenge
it's,
tower thing.
It's almost Cave of Ordeals-esque, which actually is really interesting
right.
in Breath of the Wild as opposed to other Zelda games, so it's actually kind of cool.
Yeah. But then compare that to, here's 12 more shrines and a full-on dungeon.
Yeah,
and it's like...
and narrative stuff as well, with cutscenes. Like,
yeah.
and that's exactly what they do for Xenoblade and Fire Emblem, where it's like, oh, here's some fucking bullshit for Fire Emblem. It's just like, I mean, Hector's there, so shout out. But like, I don't know, here's some fucking emblems you can engage with, and it's like, I already beat the game. There's no reason for me to have these.
But you are a pretty hardcore Fire Emblem fan, and that's not even doing it. It's not even doing it for you. So like, you think of how hardcore the audiences that they're aiming this DLC at. It's insane.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know. In the end, they get me because like the Xenoblade stuff, I was like,
you just have a right moan about it. But
yeah, totally. But like, I'm inevitably I'm gonna buy that Fire Emblem Engage DLC at some point, right? Just to play the extra story content because that's the thing I actually want to play. And it's the same with Xenoblade, where it's like they put out a bunch of it's challenge battles, and I'm like, yeah, I love the combat, but I'm not going to do challenge battles, right? But they did add 2 new heroes, which I was like, oh, that's good. That's actual story content. So I'm actually interested in that. So, but I was like, well, I'll just wait until the DLC comes out, and then I'll wrap back around to the main game and clean up all the side quests that I still had left over, which still are a good amount because that game has a lot of stuff in it. But yeah, I think... actually, one of the better DLCs was Fire Emblem Three Houses DLC. The Ashen Wolf stuff was actually really good, mainly because the map design in that DLC was way better than the main game, and the difficulty was also pitched a lot better. Like, it was really challenging and like some solid maps and some interesting new characters, like narratively.
This was the shredded crew in the gym and the dungeon team.
Yes, yeah. The people who lived in the sewers. Yeah, it was those people, the rats under the castle. But it was actually really good, like from a like narrative and also like just design perspective. So I think it's actually one of the better ones they've done. And the reason I've not played Engage yet is, first of all, I just have no fucking time to go back. But also, people have not had good things to say about the Engage DLC from like a design standpoint and difficulty standpoint. I'm like, I don't know. I'll probably get around to it when it's cheap, but it's not standing out to me as something I have to do right now. So I will wait. But yeah, you know, there's also been a lot of like more microtransaction-y stuff with Fire Emblem in the past. Like Fire Emblem Awakening sold map packs in the same way of like, oh, well, this one will get you more experience and this one will get you more gold. I'm like, well, I'll just pay like £1.50 for that, I guess. So now I have that permanently if I ever wanted to grind, which I did end up doing for Awakening for a lot. Because I played a lot of Awakening even after I beat it. That was like, you know, a few months before we started doing the show. So I was just like going back and just playing more Awakening, essentially, you know, just leveling up those child characters and stuff and all that sort of thing, which I was enjoying a lot. But yeah, I think DLC is cool and fun, but it's often something that I will think about secondarily compared to, you know, playing something new, and that's often why I get around to it either later, or if it's something I care about, I'll just play it straight away out of the gate. So yeah, there's some good stuff out there, and I think like there's some kind of classic well-known pieces of DLC from that 360 era, like the Mass Effect stuff is all well-known, and BioShock stuff as well. So the BioShock, not Burial at Sea, that was BioShock Infinite's DLC. I can't remember the name of the BioShock 2 DLC. Minerva's Den. So Minerva's Den was really interesting because it was basically the team who made that went on to make Gone Home. So it's like a really interesting like jumping off point for narrative kind of walking simulator style games. Is like that kind of spawned some interesting stuff, and I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening with DLC in that era, and now it's just very commonplace and everything has it. So anyway, DLC, it's cool. Yeah, that's it. I think that's the show. That's everything we've got for you today, folks. So thanks everybody for listening. As always, you can write your thoughts, your questions in, and Bally, you'll tell them right now where they can go to do that.
Please send your emails to thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. We are in need of more emails. And there's also a channel over on our Discord server. Leave an email in there. We'd also appreciate that.
Pop them in. Ask us some questions. It's a good time. And we'll answer them on the show. Well, that is going to close us out for today's episode. But as always, we'd like to thank some folks. Obviously, you can support the show on patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife, where you can get bonus episodes. We talk about lots of different things. Non-Nintendo video games. We do bonus bits where we talk about a bunch of stuff. And
we're going to talk about Mandalorian Season 3.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do a bit of that. But also, sometimes I'll pop some stuff onto the $5 tier, like my travel log to America. I'll be doing one for Japan, probably one for Germany as well, for Gamescom in August. It's a traveling year, so if you want to hear those, then head on over there. But Bally would like to thank some patrons.
Yes, thank you to our $10 tier plus patrons. They are Zach S., Thomas, Matthew, Albert, and Wicked Gamer UK Alan. Thank you all for your $10 tier plus support, but thank you to all of our other patrons. It's hugely appreciated, the support that you give the show.
Absolutely. If you want to keep up with us on social platforms, you can go to Twitter, and maybe it will log you in, maybe it won't. I mean, it wasn't doing that for me yesterday. The entire thing was broken. It was fucking broken. It was just a goddamn fucking nightmare. It continues to be worse every day, but we're still here, and I'm on there. You can follow me at LordNBZ. Where can they find you, Bally?
I'm at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91.
Fantastic. You can also follow the show on Twitter at TNL Podcast. That's where you go for updates and everything, and links to places like YouTube, where we put the show up, as well as on our Discord, where you can meet members of the community, hang out, and chat. And it's a good time, and we chat about lots of fun things over there. Lots of Persona chat over there as well, if people want to be chatting about Persona, because obviously that's on Nintendo now, and it's one of those series I want to replay those, but they're really long games, but if you want to have some chat about it, head on over to our Discord. That's some fun times over there. And yeah, you can find the show in various places. We're on Stitcher, we're on Spotify. You can review us on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. You can find us on any podcasting app. Just search for This Nintendo Life. We'll be right there for you. You can download us, subscribe, and it will show up every couple of weeks in your podcasting feed. It's a good way to keep up with the show and what we are doing. And I think that is going to do it for us. Bally, is it next episode that The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom will have been out?
Yes.
Yeah, so...
I can do a little rundown of our recording schedule next little while, because MBZ is off to Japan. We're actually even recording this episode a little bit early, because I'm off to Ireland for a week. But the day I get back from Ireland, Tears of the Kingdom is coming out. That's May the 12th. And then we have an episode that will be coming out on Monday the 22nd. MBZ will already be in Japan, but we will make sure to give our first impressions of Tears of the Kingdom before MBZ goes to Japan, and that will come out, as I said, on Monday the 22nd for episode 248. And then I think we mentioned it before, but we've got a very special episode coming out that we've pre-recorded, episode 249, that will be coming out on the 5th of June. That's episode 249.
Yes, I still need to edit that one, but I'm looking forward to that. It may be like our lowest trafficked episode in a while, like in the middle of like Zelda, but I think it's one of those that I'm very proud that we did and very happy with, and I think not many people will have an episode like that, I'm looking forward to putting that one out there. So and then I'll be back,
and then we'll be back in the swing of things, because episode 250 is going to come around the corner.
Jesus Christ,
we might have to juggle up our Zelda thoughts and our top 50 games of all time. We might have to. We'll see. We'll see. We'll try and fit in both, but it's a lot.
Look forward to it. But until next time we speak to you, thanks everybody for listening. See you soon. Until then, have a good one. Bye-bye, folks. musical interlude used on today was an absolute fucking banger. Aurora Shelf from Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Future Redeemed, copyright Monolith Soft and Nintendo 2023.